We inch out of this recession has to do with the changes proposed for the tax regime in April this year. And I think it's going to be very important when those come in that local government is ready to provide all the help it can. In less than 10 weeks, business will be issued with new business rate bills. They've already been given an indication of what those are. They're based on an evaluation that took place a year ago. In fact, it'll be 2 years ago in April. The problem lies in the revaluation being based on a snapshot of rateable values in April 2008, just before the credit crunch, taken at the height of the property boom. But since then, the property crash has had a big impact on rental values and has depressed the market to such an extent that the rateable values in April 2008 bear no real relation to the rateable values today. And I'm afraid that this might actually send some businesses to the wall, quite needlessly. There is a £21 billion tax regime being radically changed as we're teetering on the edge of recession. And there has not even been an impact assessment on this carried out. As such, there is no assessment of the convergence of the payment deferral scheme coming to an end in 2010, the impact of the business rate evaluation bills and the closure of transitional relief for business. It's what I call a triple whammy. That's a phrase we've heard before, but it's very real when we look at what's going to hit business this April. The viability of those businesses is not confined to their role as operating units in the country's economy. Those businesses are linchpins in our communities and neighbourhoods, and they provide the jobs upon which so many families depend. I've said I have a West Midlands constituency. It's part urban, part rural. And the West Midlands generally, because of its long-standing tradition of manufacturing, has been acutely hit by the recession, and I have seen the impact at first hand. I've seen the impact in the job clubs that we run voluntarily to relieve the load on job centres. Many people who were in the car industry have lost their jobs, and the problem for them is the jobs at the job centre are being advertised at a level of remuneration well below what they were earning. If you had a job on the production line in any of the factories that have closed, like LTV, you were probably earning £50,000, £60,000 a year. The jobs being advertised are mostly £20,000, £30,000 a year. You know, it is very difficult then to pay the mortgage, to pay the bills. And a lot of people have also taken part-time work. You know, better a job than no job, they say. And that's true in terms of getting another job. We all know that. But of course, the impact on their earning power and their ability to pay the bills is seriously affected. So I think it's absolutely vital, together in the local government family, we have a contingency plan for what we can do to help business that is facing this very unpalatable trio of changes to its tax regime. And then to think beyond that, that if there is a change of government, then in local government, you are going to be able to offer your businesses existing and those that you attract a really attractive package for them to settle or remain viable in your area. And I think perhaps the more we can think about what we can do in that way, the more of the businesses that we're going to save. Now, I've got a council estate in my constituency of 60,000 people, Chelmsley Wood. Its origins are the community left Birmingham and settled in the 1960s in the countryside of what was then rural Warwickshire. It's an estate where naturally I spend a lot of time, and where I would like to say, pay tribute to. In fact, I have two very gifted and completely local Conservative councillors, because the thing you learn about working on any estate is that you do have to know what the authentic voice of the community is, and as far as possible, find people who live on the estate to represent those who live on the estate. There's an incredibly strong sense of community. I think it partly arises from being ripped out of the centre of Birmingham in the 60s as a plonk down in the countryside and having to start again. but the community bonds are very strong. It does, however, bear the hallmarks of a community, the rationale for it which wasn't thought through with a view to the future. Originally, people had work in the metal bashing industries of Birmingham. Those jobs have dried up, and now the community finds itself almost marooned in the countryside on an estate of 60,000 people, nearly all housing, very little in the way of employment opportunities. And this presents a big problem in that community for access to alternative sources of employment. So I see the scale of the challenges that lie ahead of us when it comes to social housing. It's one that my colleagues and I are unflinchingly committed to. And I want to take this opportunity to make something very clear. People living in social housing should not be intimidated by scare tactics of irresponsible politicians. I am disturbed to find literature circulating that suggests that we would end social rents. There is no suggestion that social rents will be ended in a vulnerable community like the estate in my constituency. And I'm angered to find this scaremongering taking place. Right now, the local authority that serves this estate has a housing waiting list of 12,000 people, and that has doubled in the last year. Why? Because repossessions are now really kicking in. To begin with, the lenders were quite sympathetic to those who borrowed money to buy property, but after a few months, the sympathetic measures are beginning to wear off. So we're seeing a massive escalation on housing lists, and of course there's got to be social housing, and of course there's got to be social rent. So not only will we protect that, but we will protect the rights of social tenants, and in fact we'll strengthen them. We'll go into this election with policies that are as exciting and appealing to social tenants as any other. Instead of taking social housing and social tenants for granted, we're proposing thoughtful and quality of life-changing policies which will help narrow the gaps between the rights of those in private housing and those that are not. So let me give you 5 very clear examples. We're proposing to pilot a right to move for social tenants, whereby they can insist that they are aided by their landlord in relocating elsewhere in social housing. Now, any MP who has people in the surgery on a Saturday morning asking to make a move will tell you that it is actually extraordinarily difficult if you're a social tenant to move around the country. And you may really need to, because families fracture, elderly relatives fall ill. There are very important reasons, including the topical one, that you may need to move around to get a job. And at the moment, it's extremely difficult for social tenants to do so. If you rent privately, it's simply a case of relinquishing a lease and going to another letting agency elsewhere in the country. So my question is, why shouldn't social tenants have the same degree of flexibility? They should, and we will help them by setting up a national database through which social tenants can swap homes. And the internet's proving a powerful tool, I think, in terms of social housing provision, and tenants, we can use new technology to create much greater flexibility. We want to help social tenants realise their potential, and that's why we've pledged to lift the restrictions which prevent social tenants setting up their own business from their own home. The entrepreneurial spirit is still alive and well in the West Midlands, and I'm actually quite cheered and heartened in my job club that perhaps people who have lost jobs in the car industry and can see that there's not a job that will pay the bills at the job centre are actually thinking of setting up in business by themselves. But we have a restriction. If you're a social tenant, you're presently not allowed to do that, and that does need to change. People in social housing should be given the opportunity to build up an equity stake in their home, and what's the home after all they've looked after and cared for. So we're offering them a right to build up to 10% equity stake, which they can cash in should they wish to leave social housing.